The sun was always hot in the desert. Maria and her 10 children lived in a small run-down house that had seen better days. The wind would blow through the cracked walls, and dust would settle on everything. It was a tough place to live, especially for a mother raising so many children on her own. The land around them was dry, with only a few bushes and cactus plants trying to survive in the burning heat. There was no lush green grass or big trees here, only miles of desert stretching out under the harsh sun. Life was hard for Maria, but she always tried to stay strong for her children. Maria's husband, Diego, had passed away a few years earlier. He had been a good man, and he had worked hard to take care of his family. But after his death, things got difficult. Without him, there was no one to help with the heavy work. Maria had no choice but to step up and do everything she could to keep the family alive. She had to be both a mother and a father to her children. There were no easy answers in the desert, no simple way to make sure everyone was fed and cared for. Yet, every day, Maria did her best. The eldest child, Anna, was just 15 years old, but she helped her mother with everything she could. She helped cook, cleaned, and took care of the younger ones like little Rosa, who was only 3. Anna had learned so much from her mother about how to survive in such a harsh place. She was already growing into a strong young woman, but she was still a child in many ways. Like her mother, Anna wanted to protect her family, but she often felt helpless against the world around her. The other children were a mix of ages, from the very youngest at 3 years old to the oldest, who was 15. All of them had different needs, and Maria tried to make sure each of them had what they needed. But there was only so much she could do. There was no money to buy clothes or toys, no food to spare. They lived on whatever they could find or grow themselves. Maria would work hard every day to plant a small garden of vegetables, but the soil was tough, and it was hard to get anything to grow. It often felt like the earth itself was against them. The desert was full of dangers, too. There were rumors about thieves and bandits who roamed the area, looking for easy victims. The locals in the nearby town were too busy with their own struggles to offer much help, and anyone who wasn't wealthy or important was often ignored. Maria didn't trust many people. She knew that survival in the desert was a lonely battle. She couldn't count on anyone to help her or her children. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with beautiful oranges and purples, Maria sat on the porch of their small house, watching over her children as they played in the fading light. She looked at them with love, but also with worry. The days were getting harder, and she could see the toll it was taking on them. The children's faces were thinner than they should have been, their clothes worn out from constant use. She could feel their hunger, even though they never complained. They had learned to live with less. The children had become used to going without, to accepting the way things were, but Maria knew they deserved more. She often thought of what life had been like before Diego died. She remembered when they had enough to eat, when they could laugh together without worrying about where the next meal was coming from. Back then, their house had been full of love and joy, but now those days felt like a distant dream, far away in the past. Maria wished more than anything that she could give her children a better life. She didn't want them to grow up in the way she had, always struggling, always feeling the weight of the world on their shoulders. Her thoughts were interrupted when the sound of horses' hooves broke the quiet evening air. Maria's heart skipped a beat. She quickly stood up and looked down the long dirt road that led from the town. A group of riders were approaching. She couldn't tell who they were from a distance, but something about the way they rode made her uneasy. The horses kicked up clouds of dust as they neared, and Maria's stomach tightened. She had heard stories of raiders, men who would come into small, poor homes like hers, take what they wanted, and leave without a second thought. They often did terrible things, especially to women. Maria quickly ushered her children inside and locked the door. The riders arrived at the gate and Maria's heart raced. She pressed her back to the door, praying they wouldn't notice her, but it was too late. The men stopped in front of the house, dismounting their horses. There were 4 of them, all wearing rough clothing with dirt-streaked faces. Their eyes were cold and hungry, and Maria could feel their gaze even from behind the door. One of the men, the leader, knocked on the door. His voice was gruff and commanding. "We know you're in there, lady. Open up. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea what they wanted, but she feared the worst. She took a deep breath and made a decision. She couldn't let them hurt her children. She couldn't let them destroy what little peace they had left. Slowly, she unlocked the door, her hands trembling. When the door opened, the leader of the men stepped inside without waiting for permission. His eyes scanned the room quickly, as if calculating the value of everything around him. "You're alone?" he asked, glancing at Maria. "No," she replied, her voice shaky but firm. "I have my children." The leader smiled, though it wasn't a kind smile. "Children," he muttered. "That's too bad for you then. We're here for what you owe us." Maria's heart sank. She had no money, no valuables. She didn't know what they were talking about. "I don't owe you anything," she said, her voice more steady now. "Please, leave us in peace." The leader stepped closer to her, his eyes narrowing. "We don't take no for an answer," he sneered, "and we'll take whatever we want." With that, he grabbed Maria by the hair, yanking her head back sharply. She cried out in pain as he held her tightly. "I'll teach you a lesson you won't forget," he growled. Maria fought back the tears. This was the moment she had feared, the moment she had prayed would never come. The man's grip on her hair was tight, and with one cruel motion, he cut it off, her long, dark hair that had been a symbol of her strength, her beauty, and her pride. The men laughed as they left her, humiliated and broken, but still alive. They told her they would be back. Maria stood in shock, her heart pounding. She had never felt so helpless. Her children huddled around her, wide-eyed and afraid. She could see the fear in their faces, and she knew that they too were beginning to lose hope. As the men left, Maria took a deep breath. She wiped away the tears and held her children close. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew one thing. They couldn't live like this anymore. Something had to change. They had to find a way to survive no matter what. And so, with the last of her strength, Maria began to plan. She couldn't do it alone, but she knew deep down that there was still hope. There had to be. The fight for her children's survival had only just begun. The days that followed the raid were some of the hardest Maria and her children had ever faced. Her hair, once a symbol of her strength and pride, had been cut off in front of them, leaving her feeling vulnerable and exposed. The humiliation weighed heavily on her heart. But even more than that, the pain of seeing her children scared and unsure of the future made every day feel like a struggle. As the sun rose each morning, it seemed to bring nothing but more challenges. The small garden Maria had worked so hard to grow withered under the unrelenting heat, and there was no water left in the nearby well. Every time Maria sent one of the children to fetch a pail of water, they would return with nothing but dry, cracked earth at the bottom. The heat of the desert sun made everything harder, and there was no one to help them, no one to ease their burden. At night, when the winds howled through the cracks in the walls of their tiny shack, Maria would lie awake, unable to sleep. She could hear her children's restless tossing in their beds, unable to sleep either. She could hear their soft whimpers, their hunger, and their fear. How could she sleep when she knew that each night was another night spent without knowing what the next day would bring? She would close her eyes, but sleep never came easily. How could she sleep, knowing that her children's lives were on the line? Maria often found herself staring at the ceiling in the darkness, her mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. She felt trapped. The harsh desert landscape seemed to be closing in on her, making it impossible to escape. The world outside the shack was as unforgiving as the one inside. She had no money, no supplies, and no help. There was nowhere to turn, and every day felt like a battle she couldn't win. Every night she would whisper to herself, "How long can we survive like this?" The children, too, felt the weight of their situation. Little Rosa, the youngest, was too small to understand the full scope of their troubles, but she knew something wasn't right. She would tug at her mother's sleeve and ask in her soft voice, "Mama, are we going to be okay?" Maria would smile, though it was a smile filled with sadness, and she would pull her little girl close, trying to reassure her. "Of course we will be okay. We are strong," she would say. But deep down, Maria didn't know how much longer they could keep up this fight. She didn't want to say the words out loud, but she feared that they might be running out of time. Anna, the oldest, was a bit more aware of their situation. She was strong for her younger siblings, trying to be brave for them. But even Anna was feeling the strain. She had seen how their mother had changed since the raid, the way Maria's shoulders drooped with the weight of her worries. Anna knew her mother was scared, but she never let it show. She would try her best to help with whatever she could, even though she knew that no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't fix everything. One afternoon, after a long morning of failed attempts to water the garden, Maria sat down on the front porch. Her back was sore from the effort of lifting water, and her hands were cracked and raw. The heat of the day was unbearable, and there was no shade to hide from the sun. The family had no choice but to endure it. Anna came out and sat next to her mother, handing her a small glass of water. Maria took it gratefully, but even the coolness of the water couldn't wash away the worry that weighed on her heart. "Mama, what are we going to do?" Anna asked softly, her voice full of concern. Maria didn't answer right away. What could she say? How could she explain to her daughter that she didn't know what to do next? She looked out over the dry, empty land and felt a lump form in her throat. She had always been the one to make things better, to keep her family together. But now she felt like everything was slipping through her fingers. "I don't know, Anna," she whispered after a long silence. "I wish I could make it better." "But we will keep trying. We will keep fighting." Anna nodded, but her expression was one of doubt. She had seen the way their food supply was dwindling, and how the firewood they had gathered was nearly gone. She had seen the looks of hunger in her younger siblings' eyes. She had seen her mother struggle to put on a brave face, but Anna knew the truth. Things were getting worse, and Maria wasn't the only one feeling it. They were all feeling it. As the days passed, the situation grew more dire. Maria could feel the weight of her responsibilities crushing her. She couldn't let her children see how badly she was struggling, but it was becoming harder to hide her fears. Every day was a battle just to get through it. One morning, when Maria went to the small shed outside to get some firewood, she collapsed in exhaustion. Her body was sore, her energy drained. She had been pushing herself too hard for too long. The heat of the desert sun, combined with the lack of water and food, had taken its toll on her. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out from under her. She fell to the ground, her hands scraping against the rough earth as she tried to steady herself. She lay there for a moment, too weak to move, too tired to care. She thought of her children waiting inside. She thought of Anna and Rosa, of all the little ones. What would happen to them if she couldn't get back up? What would they do without her? Just as Maria began to fear that she might not have the strength to continue, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up, her vision blurry from the heat and exhaustion, and saw Anna standing there. Her face was pale with worry, her eyes filled with fear. "Mama, are you okay?" Anna asked urgently, rushing to her mother's side. Maria tried to smile, but the effort was too much. She felt herself being lifted up gently, her daughter's strong arms supporting her. Anna helped her back inside, and Maria collapsed onto the bed, her body aching all over. That night, Maria lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. She could hear the soft breathing of her children as they slept, but she couldn't find peace. The fear of the unknown, of the future, gnawed at her. What if they didn't make it? What if they were too weak to survive this desert, this unforgiving place? She thought about the raiders, the men who had cut her hair and humiliated her. She thought about how they had taken everything from her dignity, her peace, her sense of security. She remembered their cruel words, their sneers, and as much as she hated to admit it, a small seed of anger began to grow in her heart. She wasn't just afraid anymore. She was angry. Angry at the world for being so cruel to her and her children. Angry at the men who thought they could destroy her spirit. She was no longer willing to just accept whatever life threw at her. She would find a way to protect her children. She would find a way to survive. In the silence of the night, as the wind howled outside their little shack, Maria made a promise to herself. She would not let her children grow up in fear. She would not let the desert take them. No matter what it took, she would fight for their future. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about finding a way to make sure that they could live. And so, in the depths of her despair, Maria found a new strength. She wasn't going to give up. Not now, not ever. She would find a way, and she would teach her children the same thing, that no matter how hard life got, there was always a way forward. The days grew hotter and more unbearable as the summer dragged on. Maria and her children had settled into a pattern of survival. They woke up early to beat the heat, working through the morning to gather what little they could: water, firewood, whatever scraps of food they could find. But despite their best efforts, it seemed like everything they tried came up short. Their small garden had failed, their food stores were nearly gone, and Maria could feel the exhaustion creeping up on her with every passing day. The weight of the world felt like it was on her shoulders, and she could feel herself weakening under the pressure. But even in the midst of her struggles, there was one thing that kept Maria going: the need to protect her children. Every day, no matter how hard it was, she would force herself to keep moving forward, to keep trying. She refused to let them see how afraid she was. She couldn't bear the thought of them losing hope. But deep down, she felt like time was running out. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden light across the dry, dusty land, something unusual happened. A distant sound broke through the silence: hooves. At first, Maria thought it might be another group of thieves, but the rhythm of the galloping was different, steady and purposeful, not the chaotic sound of a group of people in a hurry. Her heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively moved to the door of the shack, her hand resting on the rough wooden frame. Anna, ever the protector, stepped up beside her. "Who is it, Mama?" she whispered, her voice full of caution. "I don't know," Maria replied, trying to keep the worry out of her voice. "Stay inside, Anna. Let me see." The sound grew louder, and soon a lone rider appeared at the edge of their small property, his silhouette clear against the backdrop of the setting sun. Maria's breath caught in her throat. The rider was alone, just one man on horseback, but something about the way he carried himself caught her attention. He wasn't just any traveler. There was a purpose to his ride, a confidence in the way he held his horse's reins. The man was tall, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. His clothes were worn, dusty, but there was an air of quiet strength about him. The man approached the shack and stopped his horse a few yards away. He didn't dismount right away, but instead he watched Maria from where he sat, as if assessing her, as if he had seen something in her that made him pause. Maria stood still, unsure of what to do. She didn't know who this man was or what he wanted, but she wasn't about to trust anyone too quickly, not after everything that had happened. She had learned to be wary of strangers in these harsh times. The man spoke first, his voice low and steady. "I've heard about you," he said, his words carrying an unusual calmness. Maria blinked, surprised. "Heard about me?" she echoed, her heart beating faster. "I don't know who you are, sir. We don't have much to give. We don't have anything for you." The man smiled faintly, though his eyes remained serious. "I'm not here for your food or your water," he said. "I'm not here for anything you have to offer except your trust." Maria felt a chill run through her, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Then why are you here?" The man took a moment before answering. "I heard about what happened to you and your children. The bandits, how they took what they wanted from you, how they threatened your family. I'm here to make sure they don't come back." Maria's heart skipped a beat. The mention of the bandits stirred something deep inside her. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about the way they had humiliated her, the way they had left her feeling helpless. She had tried not to show her fear to her children, but inside it was always there. The fear of what might happen next. The fear that they would return, more brutal and determined. "I don't know what you mean," Maria said, her voice faltering a little. "I've been trying to keep my family safe. We don't have anything to offer anyone." The man dismounted his horse and took a step closer. "I understand. And that's why I'm here. I know the desert. I know the dangers that roam it. I'm a man who deals with those who bring harm to others. I can help." Maria stared at him for a long moment. He didn't look like much, just a man worn by time and the road. But there was something about him, something about the way he spoke and carried himself, that made her feel like he could be trusted. She had spent so many days alone, fighting for her children's survival, that it almost felt like a dream to hear someone offer help. "What's your name?" Maria asked quietly, her voice tinged with skepticism, but also with a flicker of hope. The man looked at her with a quiet smile. "They call me the stranger," he said simply, as if his name didn't matter. "But what matters is what I can do for you and your family. I can help you protect them. I can show you how to defend yourselves." Maria wasn't sure what to make of this stranger. but something in her gut told her that he was sincere. He didn't seem like one of those who would take advantage of a vulnerable family. The idea of learning how to defend herself, how to fight back, felt like a spark of life in the otherwise dim world she had been living in. "I don't know what you mean by defend ourselves," Maria said, her voice unsure. "We've barely been able to survive. What could someone like you possibly do for us?" The stranger's smile faded slightly, and he looked at her with a more serious expression. "I can teach you how to protect your family. I can teach you how to fight back when the time comes. No one should have to live in fear of people who want to harm them, and no one should have to endure what you've been through. You've shown strength already, Maria. Now it's time to take that strength and use it to ensure you and your children can survive and live without fear." Maria's mind was racing. Could it be true? Could someone like him really help them? She didn't have much to lose anymore. The idea of learning how to protect her children gave her a sense of power she hadn't felt in so long. Maybe this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. "How?" she asked simply, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. The stranger nodded, his expression softening slightly. "It's not easy, but it's possible. We'll start with the basics. You need to know how to defend yourselves in case those men come back. You need to know how to use a rifle, how to set up defenses around your home, and how to read the signs of danger. We'll train together and you'll be ready. I'll teach you everything you need to know." Maria's heart was still heavy with doubt, but the glimmer of hope that had been so dim before was now burning brighter. She looked at her children who had come to stand behind her, their faces full of curiosity. "Can you teach us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The stranger gave her a solemn nod. "I can teach you, but the real lesson will be in how you use what you learn. You're stronger than you think, Maria. You're stronger than anyone knows." For the first time in what felt like forever, Maria allowed herself to believe that there was a way out of this darkness. There was a chance for her children, for herself. The stranger had given her a lifeline, and she was determined not to let it slip away. With a new sense of determination in her heart, Maria made a promise to herself and to her children. No matter what it took, she would fight for them. She would learn how to protect them, and together they would survive. Maria had never felt this way before, hopeful yet uncertain. The stranger had given them a chance to defend themselves, to regain control over their lives. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what lay ahead, but she knew she couldn't afford to waste this opportunity. For her children's sake, for her own sake, she had to try. They had been through so much already, but this could be their chance to take their fate into their own hands. The stranger stayed with them, teaching them every day. He began with the basics: how to handle a rifle, how to protect their small home from intruders, and how to recognize when danger was near. Maria had never touched a weapon before, but now, holding the rifle in her hands, she felt a strange sense of power. She practiced every day, determined to master the skills he was teaching her. The children watched, some of them curious, others frightened by the new reality unfolding in front of them. But Maria knew they needed to be strong too. The stranger had taught her that they had to all be prepared. Anna, the oldest, quickly became her most eager student. She soaked up every lesson, practicing shooting at targets the stranger had set up in the desert. At first her aim was shaky, but the stranger was patient with her. He showed her how to stand properly, how to focus, and how to breathe steady and calm. Soon Anna was able to hit the mark more often than not, and Maria could see the confidence building in her daughter's eyes. For the younger children, the lessons were different. The stranger would teach them how to stay alert, how to look for signs that something was wrong, like animals acting strangely, or the way the wind shifted when danger was near. He explained that sometimes survival wasn't about fighting, but about being aware of the world around them, knowing when to hide and when to move. Maria had never thought of these things before, but now, as she watched her children practice looking for signs of danger, she realized how important this knowledge was. Every day, the heat of the desert seemed to grow even more intense. The land around them was dry, with the sun beating down mercilessly. But Maria could feel a new kind of strength growing inside her. She was no longer just struggling to survive. She was learning how to protect her family, how to ensure they could stay safe even in this harsh world. The stranger's lessons were beginning to make her feel powerful again. One morning, after a long day of training, the stranger gathered Maria and the children together outside the shack. The sky was clear, with not a cloud in sight, and the sun was beginning to dip low in the sky. It was a beautiful sight, yet there was a heavy tension in the air. Maria could feel it in her bones. Something was about to change. "I know this isn't easy," the stranger began, his voice steady and calm. "And I know you've all been through more than anyone should. But the time is coming when you'll have to use what you've learned. It won't be enough to just know how to defend yourselves. You have to be ready to act when the moment comes." Maria's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaky. "What's going to happen?" The stranger looked at her, his eyes dark and serious. "The men who attacked you, the bandits, they'll come back. They always do. They think they can take what they want without consequences. But this time they won't find you easy prey. This time you will be ready." Maria's stomach twisted in knots. She had feared this moment, the moment when the bandits would return. She had hoped, prayed that they might forget about them. But now it seemed that hope was fading. The bandits weren't going to forget. They would come again, and this time Maria wasn't going to let them take anything from her. "But we're not ready," Maria said, her voice full of doubt. "We're just learning. We're not fighters." The stranger stepped closer to her, his voice softer but still firm. "You're stronger than you think, Maria. You've already survived the hardest part. And now you'll have the tools to protect your family. You've learned how to defend yourselves, and you've learned how to recognize danger. You know how to stand your ground." Maria looked at her children who were standing behind her, eyes wide with uncertainty. But she could see something else in their faces: determination. They had seen their mother grow stronger, and they were following her lead. Anna, in particular, had transformed from the shy, frightened girl Maria had known into someone who was ready to fight for their future. Maria knew that together they could do this. The stranger turned toward the horizon, looking out over the dusty land that stretched out before them. "They'll come at night," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "They'll think they can take whatever they want from you again. But we'll be ready. We'll set up defenses around your home, and we'll prepare for them." Maria nodded, trying to push aside the fear that was still gripping her heart. She had come so far, and now she had to trust in what she had learned. She had to believe that with the stranger's guidance they could fight back and protect what was theirs. "We'll do it," Maria said, her voice steady now. "We'll be ready." The stranger gave her a small nod of approval. "Good. We don't need to be the strongest or the fastest. But we need to be smart. We need to think ahead, and we need to be united. The key to survival in this world isn't just strength, it's knowing how to outsmart your enemy, knowing how to use the environment to your advantage." He looked back at the children, all standing quietly, their faces filled with a mix of fear and courage. "Tonight we'll start setting the traps. We'll set up lookouts and create false trails to confuse them. We'll make sure they don't know where you are or what you're capable of." Maria felt a spark of hope deep inside her. She was beginning to understand. It wasn't just about fighting the bandits head on. It was about outwitting them, making sure they were the ones who were vulnerable. The stranger had a plan, and it made sense. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in a long time, she felt like they actually had a chance. That evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the desert, the stranger led them through the steps of his plan. They set up lookout points in the hills nearby, where the children could keep an eye out for any movement. They dug small trenches around the shack to create barriers, and they used the rocks and cactus plants to disguise their tracks, making it harder for anyone to follow them. As the night settled in, Maria stood outside the shack, her heart pounding in her chest. The stars above her shone brightly, but they didn't bring her peace like they once had. She felt ready for whatever was coming. She had made sure her children knew where to hide, how to stay silent, and when to move. They were a team now, and they would fight for each other. The stranger stood by her side, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had taught her so much in such a short time, and now it was up to her to use everything she had learned. "We'll be all right," Maria whispered to herself, even though the doubt still lingered. She had to believe it. She had to be strong, for her children, for their future. The sound of hooves echoed faintly in the distance, and Maria's heart quickened. She didn't know if the bandits were coming tonight or if they would come tomorrow, but she was ready. For the first time, she didn't feel helpless. She had learned to stand tall, to fight for what mattered, and to protect her family. Whatever was coming, Maria was no longer afraid. The night was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of the wind as it swept across the desert. Maria stood in the doorway of the small shack, her heart beating loudly in her chest. The preparations were done, and now all she could do was wait. The stranger had taught her everything he could. She had learned how to stay calm, how to think through every move, and how to trust her instincts. Now it was time to put all that into practice. Her children were inside, huddled together, their faces a mixture of fear and excitement. Maria had tried to reassure them, but she could see the worry in their eyes. Anna, the oldest, stood closest to her, her hands tightly gripping the rifle she had learned to use so well. Maria felt a mix of pride and fear for her daughter. Anna was growing into a young woman, strong and capable, but Maria knew the gravity of the situation. The family was no longer just surviving. They were fighting for their lives. The stranger was outside, keeping a watchful eye on the horizon. He had positioned himself on a high point nearby, a place where he could see any movement long before it reached the shack. His presence was a steadying force, but Maria still felt the weight of what was to come. Would they be ready? Would they be able to stand their ground against the men who had once tormented them? Maria's thoughts were interrupted by a sound in the distance. A faint thud, then another. Hooves. Her heart skipped a beat. She turned to Anna, who looked back at her with wide eyes, then nodded. The bandits were coming. The time had arrived. Maria took a deep breath and quietly motioned for her children to stay hidden. The stranger had made it clear that the key to survival wasn't just fighting back, it was waiting for the right moment. They had set traps, dug trenches, and created distractions, all to confuse and mislead the bandits. The shack was small, but it was fortified now, with hidden places for the children to hide if the danger grew too close. The sound of hooves grew louder. The bandits were approaching faster than Maria had expected. She quickly moved to the window, peering out to see their figures in the distance. There were 4 of them, just as before. They were coming in slow, steady strides, confident that they would find the family unprepared just like last time. But this time things would be different. This time they weren't dealing with a helpless woman and her children. They were facing a family who had learned how to defend themselves. Maria's hands trembled, but she steadied herself, remembering everything the stranger had taught her. She checked her rifle once more, making sure it was ready. She could hear the children's soft breathing in the next room, and she could feel their eyes on her waiting. Maria took one last look at Anna, who stood firm, her gaze sharp. She nodded once, a silent promise passing between them. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The bandits reached the edge of the property, and Maria could feel her heart race as she watched them dismount. They were more relaxed than they should have been, assuming that the family had nothing left to protect themselves with. They didn't know that Maria had been preparing for this moment for weeks. They didn't know that her children were no longer the scared little ones they once were. They were becoming fighters in their own right. Maria's mind raced. The bandits were close now. She could hear their voices, low and gruff, as they began to move toward the shack. She waited, every muscle in her body tense, waiting for the moment when they would step into the trap. She felt a rush of adrenaline, but she didn't let it overpower her. The stranger had taught her to stay calm, to think through every move. And now she was ready. At the exact moment the bandits stepped closer to the shack, Maria took her position. She moved swiftly but quietly, making her way toward the window where she could see them clearly. The bandits were too focused on the shack to notice the small, carefully placed traps around them. With a deep breath, Maria gave a signal to Anna, who quickly and quietly made her way to another position. It all happened in an instant. The bandits were walking straight into their plan. As the first bandit stepped over a line of twine hidden under the dirt, it snapped, triggering the trap. A loud noise erupted from behind them as a barrage of rocks and dust flew into the air, causing the bandits to jump in surprise. For a moment, they were disoriented, confused by the unexpected turn of events. Maria didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle, aimed carefully, and took a shot. The shot wasn't meant to kill, it was meant to disarm and disable. She aimed for the leader of the group, and when the shot rang out, the bandit stumbled, his gun knocked from his hand. He looked in disbelief toward the source of the shot, his eyes wide with surprise. He hadn't expected this. At the same time, Anna took her own position and fired, hitting another bandit square in the leg. He crumpled to the ground, unable to move. The other 2 bandits, now realizing they were under attack, tried to scramble for cover, but it was too late. The traps they had set were doing their job. The children, now watching from their hiding spots, kept their eyes on the bandits, ready to help if necessary. The stranger's plan was working. The leader of the bandits, now disarmed and panicked, tried to run, but he didn't get far. The stranger, who had been watching from his vantage point, took a calculated shot, knocking the man off his feet. He wasn't dead, but he was no longer a threat. The remaining bandits, now clearly outmatched and outmaneuvered, surrendered quickly, realizing that they had underestimated the family they had once tormented. Maria, her heart still pounding from the rush of the moment, stepped out of the shack, her rifle still raised. She looked down at the bandits, who were now on the ground, groaning in pain and fear. The family had won. They had fought back and succeeded. The bandits, who had once taken everything from them, were now at their mercy. The leader of the bandits looked up at Maria, his face full of disbelief. You can't do this," he muttered, his voice shaky. Maria stood tall, her eyes unwavering. "I already have." The stranger stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You've crossed the line," he said, his presence commanding. "You won't hurt anyone else, and you'll leave this place never to return." The bandits were silent now, their eyes filled with fear. They knew they had lost. They knew they had been bested by a family that refused to give up. Maria and her children had fought for their survival, and they had won. The bandits, unable to escape, were left with no choice but to flee the desert. They had been defeated by the very people they thought were powerless. As the bandits disappeared into the distance, Maria stood with her children, her heart still racing, but a sense of relief washing over her. They had done it. They had fought back and protected what was theirs. They were no longer victims. They were survivors. The stranger gave her a small, approving nod before turning to leave. "You've learned well," he said, his voice low. "But remember, survival is not just about fighting. It's about knowing when to fight and when to walk away." Maria nodded, understanding. The fight wasn't over. They had won this battle, but there would always be challenges ahead. But for now, she felt a new sense of strength and hope. She had taken back control of her life and the lives of her children. As the sun began to rise, casting a soft light over the desert, Maria looked at her children. They were safe. They had survived. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like they had a future worth fighting for.